r/AskReddit. What is the most severe case of someone being completely out of touch with reality you've ever seen? I was at a bar and some guy was giving an impromptu lecture of why millennials are so broke and blamed it all on us being lazy students who don't want to work and go to school. When asked what he did, he was a property owner and owned a few apartment buildings. Then someone chimes up with the fact he doesn't own any properties, he manages them for his uncle who pays him to do nothing all day. My friend stole my card information and bought loads of expensive stuff. I asked her if it was her before reporting it, knowing that she was going through a tough time and I wanted to give her a chance to make it right, and that I could be in trouble for conspiracy to fraud if I reported it, and they believed I'd got stuff delivered to my friend to claim fraud for the money back. She said no, I thought someone else had done it, so I reported it. When she got arrested, she said she didn't think they'd take the fraud thing so far. She thought you could just call up banks to get the money back and they wouldn't investigate. Had a friend who insisted she was in a relationship with a C-list celebrity whom she met once during a comic convention. All the celebrity's Instagram and Twitter posts were for her and everything had a meaning behind it. When the celebrity got married, she said that it was just for the media, so she and celebrity could live a quiet life. When he didn't do anything for her birthday, she had a breakdown. She went to therapy not long after. My cousin was spoiled and sheltered her entire childhood through college. Then her parents stupidly cut the leash without any preparation and released her into society. She quickly got in trouble for bouncing checks all over town. My mom picked her up and asked why the hell she was writing bad checks everywhere. Turns out my cousin was under the impression that as long as you had checks in your checkbook, you had money in your account. She didn't understand that you deposit in a number and then can spend or withdraw up to that amount. Please teach your kids basic finance. Note, this was like 1996, before it turns into a who writes a check anymore discussion. This is my time to shine. So I grew up with a lot or restrictions that at the moment had no idea the options existed. For example, I was only allowed 2 options of shoes, but the catch was that I need to make the right choice, or that I can make friends on my own, not needing to be told this is your new friend now so go play with them. Sadly, my dad kept me in a small box, and he was the only one allowed to control what would go into that box or come out. So when I was 10, CPS was involved and was taken into foster care. That's when my world exploded. I didn't know truly how bad it was until they took me to a shoe store and told me to pick out ones I liked. I swear for the life of me, I had no clue what to do. I stood there for what felt was hours until they noticed and asked what my favorite color was. I said green because that was what my father told me I liked. But I guess I was too overwhelmed that I just remember saying yes to everything and ended up with ugly brown and pink sneakers. What children learn to do at their normal age is what I'm just figuring it out in my 20s. So reality was a hard thing to live because the whole time I was in my dream world. I knew a girl who cheated on her boyfriend. When he found out, he broke up with her. She said, "You can't break up with me, it has to be mutual." I knew someone who unironically tried to convene that not only is Pokemon demonic, but they exist in real life and there are reported cases of them attacking and harming people. My stepfather's grandpa suffered from psychosis in a strange way. He wasn't able to distinguish mirror reflections from real life. He would often be found talking to the mirrors, his reflection, for hours. Later on, he wasn't allowed to have any mirrors because he would believe that that man was there to kill him and often would turn violent. Turn violent as in he would start punching and clawing against the mirrors. My sister-in-law, kicked out by her boyfriend, comes to stay with us for a few days. We suggest looking for a flat/cheap house to rent near us. She won't live in the scummy part of town near us. She'd like a 3-bed house with garden in the best part of town. She has no savings and isn't sure if she has a job, was a part-time cashier in a supermarket, stopped going to work when COVID came. Note, not furloughed, supermarket still open, she's just not going in. When I suggested maybe she couldn't afford £500k on a family home on her salary, she suggested she just get a council house, disregarding the huge waiting list and the fact that most council properties are either ghetto parts of town. This is just the crust of a deep layer of unhinged fantasy world that she lives in. A woman I knew a few years ago. She had a job. She was convinced she was supposed to be a movie star. She never did any acting though. She also told me about the married man that she had slept with. He loves me, but he can't leave his wife. She actually did stop having sex with him, but they still hung out. My sister grew up with everything handed to her and literally cried when her first car wasn't the color she wanted. Married Rick. Can't fathom why I can't take off work whenever it suits me and says stuff like I wouldn't ask my boss for a week off. I would tell him I'm taking the week off. Rick Snyder, former governor of Michigan. When the Detroit area was wrecked by massive flooding and most houses with basements flooded a few feet deep and people lost tons of their stuff and thousands of cars were written off because of the flooding of the roads, Rick let us all know he understood what it was like because one of his vacation properties, multiple, had a leaky roof one time and some carpet got wet. My boss's wife 28. She grew up in a wealthy family and married to a man who was third generation owning the company he was in. They were a regional power, etc. She was talking to a staff that in general made $36K a year, mumbling about a staffer who was on his honeymoon. Tennessee. Ha. Tennessee. She looked around the room for everyone to join in. My god. How did she agree to that? We did Hawaii and that was least I told him was acceptable. I went to a private international school in London as a teenager. Most kids there had parents working good jobs, but in between them were some filthy rich kids with parents in the oil industry or something similar. In 8th grade we were talking about our Easter break and my friend from Belgium was talking about how his family had decided last minute to go there over the break, but had decided to drive there because there were no flights available. Then this Russian billionaire classmate of mine asked him, why don't you take a private jet? She was so clueless when we started laughing. My cousin's wife got very sick while we were at a wedding in Mexico because she drank no water, only alcohol. She said, there were ice chips in my drinks, so I thought it was enough. Anyways, she complained because at the hospital some of the staff didn't speak English. You're in a Spanish speaking country. Work with a girl who is a flat earther and on top of that denied the existence of space. When the topic came up and I disagreed, she asked if I had ever been there. Obviously I haven't. I told her I have also never been to Japan and that does not mean it doesn't exist. She complained to management about my intolerance of her beliefs. Had a dorm mate, he was kicked out of the dorm. He would crap all over the common bathroom and leave it. Didn't understand why everyone else was upset. This happened several times until he was removed. Unbelievable. My mother and several people in my family believe that God marks people. If someone ultimately has a good soul, they're white, and I'm sure you can guess where it goes from there. If only non-white did bad things, that would make sense, but you don't even have to look at much of the world to see that is not the case. When I try to bring up that tons of white people do awful things, her logic is they're lost souls that will eventually find their way. Meanwhile she'll believe a non-white will never find their way, even if they act like they have. The level of delusion this takes is one of the most frightening things to me. An ex became really religious, and I'd still talk to her sometimes. Somehow the topic of flat earth theories came up, and she said she thinks it's actually possible that it could be true. I tried to explain that we have more than enough imagery and data indicating that the earth is round, and she said it could all be planted there by Satan. You just can't come up with a response to that. In college I had a roommate from the most sheltered part of Long Island. We met an exchange student from Switzerland, and I swear to God she said this in complete seriousness. Oh wow, I didn't know people actually lived in Switzerland. I thought there were just banks there. I'm half Native American, of the northern Paiute and Washoe tribes, and whenever I meet new people, they always ask what ethnicity I'm as I look very ambiguous, and when I say Native, sometimes they say, oh wow, I didn't know Native Americans still existed. Kinda sad. There is a girl at my work that always complaining about not making enough because she makes $200 to $300 a paycheck. Then is always the first to leave early and always shows up late and has other PPL take her shifts. She asked me how I make $600 to $800 a paycheck. I said because I work more. I'm currently at work taking over her shift. She doesn't realize, if you don't work more you'll be paid less. My friend in college thought babies came from anus and vaginas are just for sex. The pastor of a small town church insisted that members set up the parish hall and provide food and beverages for 125 people after every Sunday service, even though the average attendance was only around 20 people. Week after week, month after month, much food would be disposed of, and large urns of coffee dumped down the sink, and all because the pastor was in denial about the reality of weekly attendance. My stepbrother got into a weird Gnostic religious group and thought he could convert people by talking to them, harassing them, Socrates style, except without any ability to carry out a philosophical conversation. Also assuming workplace is a fine occasion to do this. When he'd get fired from his temp jobs he'd assume it's a conspiracy and fight against enlightenment. This is more funny than deluded as a side note, but one of the group activities is to have to rewrite their religious book by hand, which he diligently did, and it wasn't a small book either. Turned out he used the wrong color ink which for some reason invalidated the whole thing. Got a job in a restaurant as a waiter. Assumed for whatever unimaginable reason that the proper way to act for waiters is to bow after taking the order. When his supervisor asked him to stop he lectured the supervisor on proper waitstaff manners. Wanted to propose to a 50-plus-year-old woman who has until then shown no signs of being interested in him. Luckily he believed in the tradition to first ask father's permission, so he asked his dad who talked him out of it. Had an idea to join the military to convert them from the inside. At one point believed the sun rays can sustain you, but luckily never really bothered to practice it. Is totally against capitalism and wants to live a free life as a wandering philosopher, rather than live as a working drone like everyone else. However does believe the working drones in his family should support his noble pursuit, while also chastising them for selling out, and more. A friend of my husband's from college went through a messy divorce recently. The marriage was kind of a sham to begin with. The girl only wanted to marry him because her religious parents wouldn't let them live together unless they were married. But she was clearly in love with someone else and even went so far as inviting said other person into their marriage as a third, which is fine and dandy as long as everyone is consenting. However, I don't think our friend was particularly enthused. Anyways, they got divorced and now she lives with the third person and is very happy, but the whole situation seems to have broken something in our friend. He now spends literally all day posting on Facebook constantly about ridiculous conspiracy theories, talking about private situations between him and his ex-wife in full public view, even going so far as to accuse her of emotional rape, which according to him is even worse than regular rape. He will post the same thing over and over on Facebook. I've seen him post the same fake conspiracy article over 30 times in a row in the span of about 10 minutes. Recently when Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race he went off and threatened to literally chop the head off of anyone who was going to vote for Biden. He kept making so many threats that he got the cops called on him. The craziest thing that's happened with him recently is that he saw a picture on his ex-wife's page of her garden in which she used a couple of these wire panel things to prop up some green beans. Apparently those wire panels were actually from some sort of business that they tried to start together, and our friend had a full conversation with himself in the comments of his own post about how it was betrayal and how she was just taunting him by using these things to keep her plants up. I don't think he's handling it very well. I met this girl in a line at an anime convention and we ended up bonding over a shared love of Sailor Moon. She lived not terribly far from me, and since I didn't really have any local friends who shared my hobbies we started hanging out. She lived in that zone of close enough to see once or twice a month, but not close enough to see all the time, so it took me a while to catch on that she was nuts. She kept talking about herself like she was a character on the show. I at first assumed this was an RP thing, since that's not terribly uncommon to make like an original character to RP within some established universe. But no, she legitimately thought she was like Sailor Moon and the reincarnation of an ancient magical girl, and she just hadn't had her powers awakened yet. To her it wasn't an anime, it was like some sort of documentary. I'm really glad I never gave her my address. Edited for grammar error. I'm from Hawaii and it's unbelievable how many people I met in college that didn't know we had access to most technology too. Thought I needed a visa because I'm a foreign student. 3. Watched Lilo and Stitch, but didn't believe Hawaiian is a real language. WTF do you think aloha and ohana is? I've had tourists at my job ask me about grass shacks and about my uniform. I had a park ranger's uniform on and they were asking about grass skirts. Geez, people just off the plane from the Midwest walked into the restaurant where I worked. Do you accept US dollars here? Loudly, as if I didn't speak English. This was on the north shore of Kauai. Also, I was yelled at by a southern couple for serving raw fish poke. They said they were going to report the place to the health department because it can't be legal to serve raw fish. Another great one was someone on the mainland asked where I'm from and I said from Hawaii. She stared blankly at me and said, "But you're white." I told her that I was an albino Hawaiian, jokingly, and she believed me. Wow, you made it and reached the end of the video. Subscribe for more Reddit contents. See you in the next video.